A woman stands at the door of a pagan city. The city is Jericho, the strongest fortress in Canaan. Walls thick enough for chariots to race across the top. Behind her, inside the house built into the wall itself, are 2 Israelite spies hiding under stalks of flax on her roof. Outside, soldiers are pounding on her door. She is not an Israelite. She is not a descendant of Abraham. She is not considered a good woman by anyone's religious standards. She is a prostitute, a foreigner, a nobody with a rope and a window and 30 seconds to make a decision. And that decision will determine whether the people of Israel ever enter the promised land. We will come back to her, but not yet. This is not a video about virtuous women. This is not a video about strong female characters designed to make you feel inspired. This is not a video about church roles or theological debates about women in leadership. This is a story about what happens when history hangs by a thread, when the official power structures have collapsed, when the armies are defeated and the kings are terrified, and God raises up the most unlikely people imaginable to change everything. Every single time Israel faced extinction, every time the nation stood at the edge of annihilation, a woman stepped into the gap, and the Bible does not just record it quietly. It puts these women in the genealogy of the Messiah. It names them when men around them are left anonymous. It calls them blessed above all women. But here is what most people miss. 2,000 years of translation and commentary have spent enormous energy making these women smaller, turning warriors into helpers, turning strategists into supporting characters, taking the women who actually held the line of history and moving them to footnotes. Let me show you what the text actually says. The first time Israel faced annihilation after entering the Promised Land, the solution did not come from a general. It did not come from a priest. It came from a mother. Her name is Deborah. She is introduced in Judges chapter 4 with a description that stops careful readers cold. She is called a prophetess, a judge, and she is holding court under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel. The Israelites come to her to have their disputes settled, not some of the disputes, all of them. She holds the seat of highest civil, spiritual, and military authority in the nation. And Israel has been suffering for 20 years under a Canaanite king named Jabin and his general Sisera, who commands 900 iron chariots. The Israelite men are hiding. The farmlands are empty. The roads are dangerous. The nation is being slowly crushed. Deborah sends for a man named Barak, a military commander, and gives him a direct word from God. Go to Mount Tabor. Take 10,000 men. I will draw Sisera and his chariots to the river Kishon and deliver them into your hand. It is a clear command, a battle plan from God delivered through the highest authority in the nation. Barak refuses to go without her. This is a military commander saying he will not obey God's direct order unless the prophetess holds his hand. And Deborah does not flatter him. She does not soften the rebuke. She says, because of the way you are going about this, the honor for this victory will not be yours. It will go to a woman. She goes with him. The battle happens. Sisera's chariots are swept away. Sisera himself flees on foot, exhausted and desperate, and comes to the tent of a woman named Jael. Jael is not an Israelite. She is a Kenite, a descendant of Moses' father-in-law. Her husband Heber has a peace treaty with the Canaanite king. By all political logic, she should protect Sisera. She invites him in, gives him milk, covers him with a blanket, waits for him to sleep, and then she takes a tent peg and a mallet and drives the peg through his skull into the ground. Deborah's song in Judges chapter 5 praises Jael as most blessed of women. That phrase, most blessed of women, appears only twice in the entire Bible, here for Jael, and again in Luke chapter 1 for Mary, the mother of Jesus. The woman who killed the enemy general is honored with the same title as the woman who bore the Son of God. Pay attention to that. When the official army was paralyzed with fear, when the male commander refused to lead without a woman beside him, it was 2 women who won the war. One gave the strategy, one drove the peg, and Deborah herself names it in her song. Village life in Israel ceased, she says. It ceased until I arose, until I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. She does not say a helper arose. A supporter arose. A woman who advised the real leaders arose. She says, I arose, and the nation was delivered. Now watch what happens when the threat is not military, but genocidal. Centuries later, the Jewish people are living in the Persian Empire under King Xerxes. A man named Haman, the king's highest official, has persuaded Xerxes to issue a royal decree ordering the destruction of every Jewish man, woman, and child in the empire on a specific date. The decree has gone out, it cannot be revoked. The entire Jewish people face extinction. The queen is a Jewish woman named Esther. She was an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai after her parents died. She won the king's favor and became queen, keeping her Jewish identity secret at Mordecai's instruction. When the decree goes out, Mordecai tears his clothes and wears sackcloth and ashes. He sends word to Esther. She needs to go to the king. But here is what the text makes absolutely clear. Anyone who approaches the Persian king without being summoned is put to death, unless the king extends his golden scepter. The queen is not exempt from this law. Esther has not been summoned to the king in 30 days. She has no guarantee the scepter will be extended. Mordecai sends her a message that has echoed through 3,000 years of history. Do not think that because you are in the palace you will escape. Relief will come from somewhere else. But who knows? Perhaps you have come to your position for such a time as this. And Esther makes a decision. She does not ask Mordecai to go instead. She does not send a servant. She calls for 3 days of fasting, puts on her royal robes, and walks into the inner court of the palace uninvited. The king extends the scepter. She lives. But here is where you see her intelligence. She does not rush to speak. She does not blurt out the crisis. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Then she invites them to a second banquet. She builds trust, creates setting, watches Haman's arrogance expand until the moment is exactly right. And then at the second banquet she exposes him, directly, by name, to the king's face. Haman is hanged on the very gallows he built for Mordecai. The decree is reversed. The Jewish people are saved. And the Feast of Purim, still celebrated by Jewish people around the world today, commemorates what a Jewish orphan girl did when she decided that dying for her people was better than surviving without them. Here is what most people miss about this story. The book of Esther never once mentions God, not a single time. But it shows God working through a woman's courage, a woman's strategy, and a woman's willingness to die when every human power structure around her had failed to protect the people she loved. Hold that thought, because the next woman had more theological authority than the king of Judah himself. Her name is Huldah. Most Christians have never heard of her. In 2 Kings chapter 22, King Josiah is repairing the temple. The high priest Hilkiah discovers a scroll that had been lost for generations. It is likely the book of Deuteronomy, the heart of the Mosaic law. When it is read to the king, Josiah tears his robes in grief because he realizes how far the nation has drifted from God's commands. So he sends his officials to seek a word from the Lord. He sends them to a prophetess named Huldah, not to Jeremiah, not to Zephaniah. Both were active prophets in Jerusalem at the same time. He sends them to Huldah, described as the wife of Shallum, keeper of the wardrobe. She authenticates the scroll. She declares it is the word of the Lord. She prophesies coming judgment on Judah for their idolatry, but mercy for Josiah himself because of his repentant heart. And the king accepts her word as authoritative. Without Huldah, there is no Josiah revival. Without her authentication, the scroll might have been dismissed or doubted. The greatest spiritual reformation in Judah's history depends on a woman with wardrobe keys and a word from the Lord. The Talmud itself later asks why the king sent his officials to Huldah instead of to Jeremiah. And the answer, debated across generations of rabbis, never questions whether a woman could hold that authority. She did hold it. The text does not apologize for it. Now we come back to the woman at the door of Jericho. Her name is Rahab. The soldiers have come. They are looking for the spies, and Rahab tells them the men left before the gate closed. She sends the soldiers in the wrong direction. Then she goes up to the roof, finds the 2 Israelite men hidden under the flax, and makes a covenant with them. She tells them she knows that God has given them the land. She has heard what he did in Egypt and at the Red Sea. She says, "I know that the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This is a Canaanite prostitute making the most complete confession of faith in God's sovereignty, found anywhere in the book of Joshua. She lets the spies down by a scarlet cord through her window. She ties the same cord in the window as a sign. When Jericho falls, she and her family are spared, and she lives among the people of Israel from that day forward. Here is what breaks me every time I read this. Matthew chapter 1 lists her in the genealogy of Jesus, Rahab, by name. The Canaanite prostitute from Jericho is the great-great-grandmother of David and an ancestor of the Messiah. Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, lists her alongside Abraham, Moses, and Noah. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. James 2 uses her as the example of faith that produces action. Alongside Abraham, the father of all who believe. She was not the right ethnicity. She was not the right profession. She was not the right background. But she had the right faith. And she held the door open for the people of God to enter the land of promise. And the pattern finds its ultimate completion in a teenage girl in Nazareth. Her name is Mary. She is betrothed to a carpenter. She is from a town that nobody important has ever cared about. And an angel appears and tells her she will conceive by the Holy Spirit and bear a son who will be called the Son of the Most High. His kingdom will have no end. She asks one question, not who am I, not I am not worthy, just how will this be since I am a virgin? The angel explains. And Mary says the words that alter all of human history, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. In that moment, in that one sentence of surrender, the eternal God takes on human flesh inside the body of a teenage girl in a nowhere town. Every woman before her prepared the way. Rahab protected the line of promise. Deborah preserved the nation. Esther saved the people. Huldah authenticated the word. And Mary carries the fulfillment. The Apostle Paul understood this pattern. In Romans chapter 16, he names 9 women as his co-workers and ministry partners. Phoebe, whom he calls a deacon and patron of the church. Priscilla, who taught the theologian Apollos the way of God more accurately. Junia, whom he calls outstanding among the apostles. The women were always there, at every turning point, in every crisis. When history needed someone willing to risk everything, God found a woman with the courage to say yes. So what do we take from all of this? 3 things. First, the Bible does not present women as supporting characters in God's story. It presents them as decisive agents at the most critical moments in history. When the survival of Israel was at stake, when the Messiah's line needed protecting, when the law needed to be authenticated by someone God trusted, he chose women. Not for decoration, for decision. Second, if you have been told that your gender limits your significance, the Bible disagrees with evidence. The genealogy of Jesus contains a Canaanite prostitute, a Moabite foreigner, and a woman whose husband was murdered so a king could take her. The Hall of Faith contains a woman who committed treason against her own city. The early church was taught, funded, and led by women Paul called his partners. The text is not ambiguous about this. Third, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video, God is not looking for the most qualified candidate. He is looking for the willing one. Rahab was disqualified by her profession. Deborah was disqualified by her gender in the eyes of every surrounding culture. Esther was disqualified by her ethnicity and her orphan status. Mary was disqualified by her age and her obscurity. Every single one of them said yes anyway, and history changed. Which of these women hit you the hardest? Rahab's faith in a God she had only heard about. Deborah's authority over men who refused to lead. Esther's courage to walk into certain death. Huldah's quiet theological power. Or Mary's surrender in a single sentence. Tell me in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this changed the way you read your Bible, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been told they are too small, too broken, too unlikely. Someone who needs to know that God has always chosen the unlikely to do the impossible. He chose a prostitute to open the door to the promised land. He can use anyone.